Communicators, communications students, business people, and all of you communi-curious out there, you've stumbled on For Immediate Release, the April edition of the Hobson and Holtz Report, where this month we'll talk about a demand Ogilvy is making of influencers it recruits to pitch brands it represents. Do you want to live forever? A metaverse company is figuring out a way for you to do just that. Kinda. Coca-Cola is inviting you to taste pixels. The corporate world seems to be reverting to some of its worst inclinations. What will happen to Twitter if Elon Musk succeeds in his takeover bid and introduces unfettered free speech? And do consumers care how much money you donate to charitable causes, or are they more interested in how much you sacrifice to make that donation? Dan York is here with a report that includes why we should care about the splinternet and other digital implications of Russia's war on Ukraine, Wikipedia's decision to stop accepting crypto donations, how much the guy who spent a fortune on Jack Dorsey's first tweet was able to get for it at auction, the state of Ethereum's planned merge, and more. It's all coming your way right now on For Immediate Release, and you don't want to miss a second of it. Another fine podcast from the FIR Podcast Network.
This is For Immediate Release, the podcast for communicators.
Hi everyone, and welcome to For Immediate Release, episode number 246 for April 2022. This is Neville Hobson.
And this is Shel Holtz. Welcome, everybody. Neville, it's fun doing those short episodes during the week, but it's great to have these long conversations. I'm looking forward to this. I think we have a great collection of topics to cover today.
A blockbuster episode by the look of it.
It does look that way. Couple of things to share before we get into our stories, starting with the fact that the Circle of Fellows broadcast, which is turned into a podcast here on the FIR Podcast Network, will be taking place this coming Thursday. And it's a good one. It's about executive communications. It's at a different time. It's at 4 p.m. Eastern, and that's to accommodate the participation of Adrian Cropley, who is in Australia, and Amanda Hamilton Atwell, who is in South Africa. Also joining us will be Mark Schumann and Brad Whitworth for an hour of conversation. And because that's live, you listeners are able to participate with your comments and observations and questions. So information about that is on the homepage of the FIR Podcast Network, and hope you'll be able to join us for that. I'll be moderating that conversation. I also want to run down very quickly the short episodes that you and I have done, Neville, between the March episode of the Hobson and Holtz Report, this long monthly installment, and today's episode, starting with one that we did about a new regulatory requirement for companies to disclose the impact that they are having on the climate and the risk to their organization from climate change. And that's going to come up later in the show in the context of one of the stories that I'm going to be reporting today. We also talked about P&O Ferries and their heavy-handed and very public firing of all of its employees. By the way, is there an update on that? What's going on? Oh, yeah,
it's got worse, Shel. Absolutely worse than that. It's too long to really go into in details here, but if you Google P&O Ferries latest, you'll see a horror story emerge as a result of that. But yeah, it's terrible.
Well, I'll have to go look at that because that was a fascinating story. We also explored whether journalists need a personal brand. We looked at a study that finds that saying nice things about your competitors can actually improve your own sales. Talked about these new tools that LinkedIn has made available for creators. We talked about Twitter's non-April Fool's prank, in which they announced that they are going to be releasing at some point an edit button that's in development. Everybody thought that was an April Fool's prank because it was presented on April 1st. I think deliberately in order to gin up more conversation. And lastly, we talked about chatbots and whether they might become de facto search engines, and if they did, if that's a good or a bad idea. All those short episodes, each of them under 15 minutes, most of them around 10 minutes, are available now in the feed, and urge you to give them a listen.
Really quickly, we want to share something our friends at Storyblock have to make you smarter. It's a new report called The State of Content Management, and it's a very useful survey of 515 businesses in the US and Europe, companies just like yours, and how they're approaching content distribution through their digital channels in 2022.
Think about it. You have to provide content for your website, maybe a mobile app. Then there's e-commerce platforms, voice-activated speakers. Managing content is more complex today than ever. Get insights and ideas on how companies like yours are tackling the content challenge with the State of Content Management report from Storyblock. Just go to storyblock.com/FIR for your free report. That's Storyblock without the C, .com/FIR.
So our first story is a topic that we've talked about on and off over the months and years, about influencer marketing, influencer engagement, perhaps. It gets a lot of bad press, particularly when there's suspicion of trust about activities by people, typically celebrities that make news headlines, the amount of money they're making, and some of the things that they do or don't do that they should or shouldn't do. Well, here's a story that I found quite interesting about Ogilvy, one of the big advertising agencies, and something they've done in the UK. That was a new policy they launched that means that they would stop working with influencers who edit their faces or bodies in brand campaigns. It's a hot topic on airbrushing, on improving appearances of people in photography for brands. And typically they are models, people who are accustomed to being in the limelight and who have such recognition. They promote brands. Ogilvy's not going to do that anymore. And the Drum had a good report earlier in April where their head of influence, that's his job title actually, Shel, this guy, head of influence, Rahul Titus, told the Drum in an interview that influencer marketing is supposed to be the authentic side to marketing, but now it churns out such staged content that is so harmful to anybody looking at social media, unquote. Ogilvy's ban applies to all parts of the UK group, which counts the likes of Dove among its clients. Dove is owned by British consumer goods giant Unilever. Dove's global vice president of external communications and sustainability, Firdaussel Honsali, came out in support of the policy, saying Dove only works with influencers who do not distort their appearance on social media. So how is this policy going to work? Well, there's three elements to it. First, Ogilvy say they will no longer work with influencers who retouch their skins or bodies, but will allow work that edits the contrast or brightness. The Advertising Standards Authority's beauty filter standards will be enforced in the UK, and that body is the advertising regulator in this country. Secondly, Ogilvy will use its InfluenceO tech stack to detect when images have been retouched. That's obviously a checkpoint they need to have. And finally, briefs will be made more flexible to allow for more authenticity from the start. It was Ogilvy's hope that other agencies would follow suit and enact similar policies. But speaking with the Drum, again, a few influencer agencies said they have already committed to exploring the topic with their clients. However, some industry executives raised concerns that a ban wouldn't get to the root cause of why influencers edit their images, and called for an educational approach to fixing social media's body image harms. Others questioned its effectiveness if traditional marketing doesn't abide by the same rules, and a few saw it as penalizing influencers. Specific reactions have been mixed. Before I get to one of those, Shel, what's your take on this?
I think in general, it's not a bad idea. We do know that it's harmful. It creates expectations among a lot of the young people who are looking at this thing about the way they're supposed to look. I would hope that the organizations for whom these influencers are being recruited by Ogilvy, who's creating the ads, are organizations that have made commitments to do this with other advertising. There are a lot of organizations that have said we will not use retouched photoshopped images that change body appearance or facial type. I don't have a problem with changing lighting and things like that. We do that on everything except photojournalism, frankly. And even then, you can do some dodging and other things with the photos that just make it look a little better, make it look more real, in fact. But yeah, I don't think it's appropriate for brands to be hypocritical about this and say, we're going to demand this of our influencers, while at the same time, when we use a model in the studio, we're going to do it like crazy. I think they need to be consistent with this, and I think they need to be public with the reasons why. I also don't have a problem with the idea of an education campaign, although I would hope that would be baked into the demand of the influencers, or what's written into the contract is an explanation of why. In fact, I would hope that anybody who's making money as an influencer is already aware of the controversy around that sort of thing. But in general, I think the motivation is good. I just think the execution needs to be fair and consistent.
Yeah, that's my view on it too. And in fact, that seems to be reflected in many of the critical commentaries. They're not critical in a negative sense. No one's saying this is a bad idea to put this in place. But the theme I see emerging from nearly all of the reactions that the Drum got in the article they posted about it is similar. And maybe this comment from one of them, Christina Miller, the UK head of social at WPP-owned global branded customer experience agency VML-Y&R. The Y&R, I'm sure, is young and Rubicon, as was back in the day. So it's a conglomerated new entity. She says...
They're all conglomerated now.
Yeah, really. I mean, she says, before penalizing influencers and telling them beauty standards are different, we need to ensure they truly are across the board. For example, we need to ask if brands are still using altered images or touched up models across other marketing touchpoints. And that is the key point, that you need to ensure everywhere embraces this, not just missing out a few bits and pieces. And therein lies, I suspect, the main issue for this, because it requires you to actually have a consistent view on it across an organization. That's tricky because it is the case in many organizations. Unilever is probably the one where it is likely to be, because of their behavior in recent years on this very topic has been exemplary by comparison to many others. My favorite comment, though, I guess, in the Drum's piece was from Gemma Dowler, who's the art director at Creative Team Agency. She said this, I thought it was quite good. Ogilvy won't work with anyone it has decided has overstepped its imposed editing line, she says. But other brands won't work with women because they're not perfect enough. Women are constantly stuck between this rock and a hard place. Beauty filters are a product of decades and decades of the advertising world telling women how they should look. Now taking the high ground on saving women from themselves feels a bit rich, she says. Maybe just choose your talent based on their skill rather than their looks. That aspirational concluding point is great, but I don't think that's likely to happen anytime soon, because often cases, the influencer, if it's female in particular, and a product combine where the perception of beauty and other positive attributes are key to the brand messaging. I think it's wrong to ban that, but I agree with this, with the whole notion of this with the policy guidelines and the fact that altering images to improve the perceived look or visual appeal of a form, whether it's female or male for that matter, and you don't know it's being done, that's what it's combating. So I think it's a good first step. A lot of work still to do, particularly across organizations where one part is doing this and the other 15 parts aren't. That requires help. And indeed, they talk about it in other commentary in this article about the education role that you mentioned.
I'm not sure that we need an all or nothing approach. I'm not sure I agree with that, because if one or two do it and it's effective, that could influence the others to follow suit, or it could create more pressure on the others to follow suit. I would rather see some brands doing it than no brands doing it. And, you talk about Unilever, they have some brands like Axe, where the whole campaign, I don't know if they're still doing this, but not that.
They're not.
No, they're not, where you wear their stuff and you're going to be attacked by every attractive woman within a 5-block radius.
Those were different, though, because there was humor driving a lot of that.
There was definitely humor. Those were
you're not meant to
be
take it
funny.
seriously. Nevertheless, It did stray a little.
You know, the point of a lot of advertising is that if I use the product, I'm going to be like that person in the ad. So they want to make that person in the ad as appealing as possible. So that's a mentality that has to shift. And I think that shift can happen when advertisers see what is being done effectively by those brands that have made that shift, made that
so
pivot.
That's part of the educational approach in that case. But I would say, in response to Gemma's comment, there's a great comment, Gemma, about choosing your talent based on the skill rather than looks. I think you need to choose people with talent and with looks. That's what I'd go for.
Well, turn away from an ad with somebody who's not appealing to you, right?
Exactly. So,
or just find a whole different way to promote these things. Well, the theme of this next report is one we've covered once or twice before. There are companies working to figure out how to give us a sort of digital immortality. I don't know, Neville, if you've seen this TV series. Over here it's on Amazon Prime. I think it's called Upload.
Oh, yeah. I saw it in the very first season when it came out a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So the premise there is the guy is going to die of some horrific disease, so his entire brain is uploaded to this virtual world where he continues to exist. And that's not what we're talking about here. But there would be an avatar or a bot programmed with information about our lives and our personalities that might be able to continue on carrying conversations with those who knew us. Now, the latest iteration of this is part of a virtual space, part of the metaverse called Somnian Space. I haven't visited Somnian yet. I'm still getting to know my way around Decentraland, but Somnium is one of the few that's already compatible with VR headsets, and is coming soon to the Quest too, so I'll probably take a look. But it's a blockchain-based, decentralized virtual world, so they're not collecting your data and selling it to advertisers. You are in control of your data. Anyway, their founder, Artur Sykov, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Sychov, he's behind what he's calling the Live Forever mode. This is an upcoming feature that will allow people to have their movements and conversations stored as data, then duplicated as an avatar that moves, talks, and sounds like you, and will keep on doing so long after you're gone. For Sykov, who lost his father to cancer, this would enable people to talk to their departed loved ones whenever they wanted to. According to a report that was originally in PR Week, Sykov had a revelation about the potential of the metaverse to enable this kind of immortality when he realized the awesome data collection potential of VR. He said, the amount of data we potentially could record about you is probably on the magnitude of, I'd say realistically, 100 to 300 times more than when you're on a mobile phone. The VR, as it records, can collect the way your fingers, mouth, eyes, and entire body move and quickly identify you more precisely than fingerprints. It'll also collect how you speak and sound. So with all that stored data, the company will create an immortal mirror image of its users. Now, the process begins with recording and storing the data of those who choose to pay for this opportunity, which is going to be made available later this year. But with the data collection limited at that point to the movements and sounds people make when they are on parcels of land that they have bought in the Somnian space. He's guessing this is going to run about $50 a year, and how you're going to pay for that after you've died, I don't know, but I'm sure they're going to figure that out somehow. Once you pay, you turn on the record function when you want to, and you can turn it off, so things that you don't want to be part of your immortal mirror don't have to become part of it. And you'll also be able to tell the company to delete all of it if you decide that, I'm not really down with this after all. Okay, this is all science fiction-y fun, but the more I got to thinking about this, the more I wondered about applications beyond being able to have a conversation with your great-great-grandchildren 100 years from now. I was thinking about employees being able to have conversations with the company's founder, for example, or consider that genius engineer in a tech company that other engineers can go pick their brains. It's almost like the holodeck on Star Trek, where Geordi would go talk to some legendary engineer who had built the warp drive or whatever. The article talks about ethical issues that will inevitably arise over this kind of technology. Like, what if the kids of a deceased Somnian space user find it painful or disturbing or just plain creepy to know that their father is wandering around out there in the same metaverse that they're in? For me, the ethical questions are more like, what if the leader of a murderous cult can find a way to continue leading his minions after he's gone? What if somebody can hack this and use it for nefarious purposes? What if AI evolves the avatar into something beyond what the person was? Just today, I read a piece in the New York Times Magazine about neural nets, artificial intelligence that can now write original prose with what the magazine calls mind-boggling fluency. The question is, can we believe everything they say? And since AI is undoubtedly going to be part of live forever avatars, you have to wonder, putting on your speculative fiction hat, whether they can be manipulated by a nefarious third party or whether they may, use their learning capabilities to somehow evolve into something different than the person who recorded that data in the first place. Saikov says all these things are going to be worked out with his legal team and Somnium Space's users. And, somehow we do manage to figure out some of these ethical issues and continue debating the rest of them. But assuming that they can be addressed, all of this makes for some intriguing possibilities.
It does, doesn't it? I was actually looking at the Somnium Space website, listening to what you were saying, and I see there two things of interest. One, it's a game. There's a game in play there, plus NFTs. Interesting. They have an NFT marketplace in collaboration with OpenSea using Ethereum and Solana. So cryptocurrency is a big feature in there. But I think the thrust of the discussion we're having here is the creepiness factor, as I would see it. And I think the ethical issues are huge. I would say I couldn't see this getting through any legal approvals at all of any type whatsoever in the UK. I just couldn't see it happening anytime soon. European Union, who knows? But probably not. Because
wait a minute, really? If I choose to share this myself,
totally.
That would be an issue?
Of course it would. Yeah, of course it would. I mean, it mentions in the article here at the end of it that you reference here in Vice that they're talking here about an example in their conclusion. With all the ethical preparation experience a company can muster, there will be inevitable and justifiable ethical questions about allowing a version of a self to continue on in perpetuity. What if, for example, the children of a deceased Somnian Space user found it painful to know he was continuing on in some form in their metaverse? So that's a genuine thing. Personally, I find that whole notion creepy. I have to say that the idea of me being able to talk to my grandfather, do I want to do that? I'm not sure I feel really uncomfortable with the idea of being able to do that. But that could well be simply because we're not used to this idea yet. I mean, the debate...
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, yeah.
To me, it's similar to the debate that's ongoing in Europe anyway, everywhere in Europe, including here, about assisted suicide. Where you have the right to decide and others can assist you to end your life. Here it's illegal completely, yet Switzerland permits it. So you've got a constant flow of people who are going to Switzerland to die, basically, and others to help them achieve that. Most people I know find that notion very, very creepy. But is it just that we're just not accustomed to this yet? And maybe that's it, in which case communication is going to be absolutely key to all of this. Nevertheless, it does point out the huge obstacles for this are the ethical and moral ones, I would say. So,
yeah, it could be 100 years from now. It's common and typical for people to engage with their deceased relatives.
It could be. I mean, would I go back to the grandfather analogy? I just wouldn't feel comfortable chatting to my grandfather. What about my parents? What about people I know who've passed away? Never mind, well-known public figures. And not so much that. It's like knowing that there's a version of them still around. It probably is that, Shel, nothing more. It's we're just not used to the idea of that. And on the face of it, it sounds weird. So this is something this isn't just for lawmakers to decide. This is one of those society level debates that needs to take place that will take a long time, I would say.
Yeah, I'm thinking more about being able to go talk to Walt Disney.
Yeah.
Somebody like that. So,
well, I mean, I did read another story. This was a while ago now about a guy who'd done something similar through recordings he'd done with his either parents.
Right.
And it was some algorithm which created the responses when he then had a sort of a conversation with it.
Yeah, basically a chatbot.
I guess it was that. Yeah, it must have been.
Yeah.
So, maybe it's we're just not used to all this yet. It'll come. I think it will.
It'll come.
A version of this will come.
And I think there's an opportunity, at least for marketers, to consider how they might be able to use something like this.
To me, the issues there are really an evolution of the current issues in that very context. The use of data, the use of personal information of people, the risks of people misusing it, and that happens all the damn time because that's what people do.
Well, of course it does.
That will be no different with this, I would say. In which case, I can see this taking a huge amount of time to even progress to discussions. There we go.
Well, I think they're going to have to see a working version of it before people start having conversations about it. While it's theoretical like this, I think people are ignoring it.
Yeah, maybe.
But when they start hearing about actual implementations, that's when people are going to go, ho, wait a minute.
So we need to all go and watch Upload, the whole season's worth, I think.
Yeah, which is, again, a different thing, right? This is actually the consciousness of the person.
No, this does enter into that broader realm of consciousness. So if you think about some of my favorite science fiction stories, particularly Altered Carbon, which talks about the kind of soul, your brain, the thought process, everything you have is recorded, and you can shift it from a body to another. That notion is quite fascinating, I find.
So you liked Altered Carbon?
Oh, I mean, I read the book as soon as it was published back in 2004. I've read.
I was thinking about the Netflix series.
Richard Morgan's books. Yeah, the Netflix was okay.
That's what I heard.
It kind of flowed along to the storylines in the book. The book was outstanding, I have to tell you. Any case,
I am a Joel Kinnaman fan, the actor.
Oh, he was okay in that. He was okay in that.
I didn't hear great things about the series.
No, but he was good in that first season. The other seasons have been other actors because that's the notion of the story, where it's not the same body, or the sleeve as it's called in the story. It's not the same one, therefore it's a different actor each time.
Okay, well, maybe I'll have to give those books a try. I haven't read them.
You should. They're all quite good. So that digressed quite a bit from the main story, but it's related. It is related. So we could even talk about the holodeck in Star Trek in that case, but they're all related to all of this. I think, though, the concept of this is truly extraordinary, that we're on the cusp of being able to do this. The idea, though, of those personal connections and being able to do all of this with people who are close to you, and indeed, you doing something to engage with people that way, personally, I just find really creepy. The notion of doing this with celebrities, I can't think of anyone I'd like to sit and have a conversation with who I know has been dead for 50 years. I don't really want to talk to them as if they're live. That's the thing. I can watch the recording of them and all that. So that's my take on it.
The first company that I can think of that should be thinking seriously about this would be Ancestry.com. You found your great-grandmother? Want to have a chat with her?
Oh, dear. Okay. We'll come back to this, I'm sure. Anyway, let's move on to Coca-Cola. And this story resonated with me when I saw this on Cointelegraph first and then a few other places, because it has a connection with something you and I both worked on 15 years ago with Coca-Cola. But this story is related to a drink they've done, and this is classic consumer marketing for particularly brands like this. Tastes like pixels, says the headline, and comes with a Fortnite code for a game. So Coke has unveiled a new product called Coca-Cola Zero Sugar Bite, BYTE, which was apparently born in the metaverse. It tastes like pixels, says Cointelegraph. The drink's gimmick as a physical drink from the metaverse includes the fact that it comes with an island code that unlocks special maps and 4 mini games on the popular Fortnite video game. By Epic Games. Epic recently scored a $2 billion investment from Sony and Lego to build its own part of the metaverse. The product line will launch on May the 2nd and will only be available in the US, Latin America, and China. What does Coke say about it? Well, according to Oana Vlad, who's the senior director of global strategy at the Coca-Cola company, quoted by MSN Lifestyle, for our second expression from Coca-Cola Creations, we wanted to create an innovative taste inspired by the playfulness of pixels, rooted in the experiences that gaming makes possible. Just as pixels power digital connection, Coca-Cola Zero Sugar Bite brings people together to share moments of real magic, capital R, capital M. The cans come in packaging with graphics that feature pixels forming the Coca-Cola logo. The cans also can be scanned to access a mini augmented reality game, the one that Cointelegraph reported on, which tells the story of Byte, an 8-bit pixel that was left behind when Coca-Cola Byte entered the metaverse. The game itself has you controlling Byte, jumping up and down a spiral staircase so that it can join back to its Coca-Cola friends. This reminds me, as I said at the beginning, Coca-Cola 15 years ago, when they and what they experimented with in Second Life. That was a project both you and I were involved in, Shel, when we worked at Crayon. So, thinking about that, does it stimulate any thoughts in your mind? What do you think about this latest Coke move in the virtual world?
Oh, I think it's fine. First of all, no one's going to be able to argue and say, nah, that's not what a pixel tastes like.
I like that.
So it's clever. And I think a certain segment of the population is going to go out and buy it just to figure out what they think a pixel tastes like. Or just what this particular version of Coca-Cola tastes like. But the idea that it gives you that code and gets you into that virtual space is what's intriguing to me. And the idea that Coca-Cola would have, some parcel of land, some kind of presence in the metaverse actually makes tremendous sense. I was just having this conversation with a couple of folks at dinner last night that, businesses are going to want to be there. Increasingly, they'll want to be there as they see consumers are there, and Coca-Cola is finding a way to bring consumers there. So it sort of feeds that virtuous circle, right? Keeps that momentum going. I think this is why brands are going to want to be there is they can find a way to bring consumers there and engage with them. It's just a new form of marketing at this point, really, to come into this land and play these Coca-Cola themed games. Just cements Coca-Cola more in their minds as a brand that they want to be connected with. So it works for me. Why not?
Yeah, me too. And again, as I mentioned, it made a connection with this project we worked with Coke on back in 2007. And that was interesting, that one show. Think about it. Virtual Thirst was what it was called. It was a competition to design a new generation of Coke vending machines. That's what the contest was. But big difference, though, because it's about imagining a device that would dispense experiences, not metal cans or plastic bottles. And those experiences would happen in Second Life. And again, think about this, listeners. Second Life back then was where a lot of experimentation was going. A lot of big brands were in there. Coke was one of the biggest consumer brands that invested time, money, and imagination into seeing how this could work as a marketing channel in a way that was designed to appeal to people who are using that virtual world. And so we were involved in creating this whole thing. There was a virtual press event on Second Life. They were fun, those things, all those avatars flying around, in which invited audience of mainstream media, reporters, bloggers, podcasters, the whole lot, press releases issued, etc. So I looked.
Yeah, just so you know, I just looked it up on YouTube, and there's a video here with 16,000 views. Virtual Thirst winning entry unveiling. The Coca-Cola Company Crayon, Millions of Us, and winner Anne-Marie Mathis unveiled the winning entry.
It was terrific. So this had parallels in my mind to this product too. The website that Coke built to go with this, the Creations website, it's off their website called The Hub, has some terrific video and images of this. Made me think, wow, have things moved on in terms of high resolution imagery that you can put on, doesn't see it on a browser these days. But similar, I'm not saying the contest is similar, not by any means, but the concept thinking to has something with the difference, and it's about imagining experiences and in a virtual world. That's what they powered up back in the day, and they're doing the same again here too, which I think is great. So I hope this is a success. I'm going to keep an eye on it and see if it is.
Greetings, Shel and Neville, and FIR listeners all around the world. It's Dan York coming at you from Shelburne, Vermont, and it is tempting to talk about Elon Musk's attempt to buy Twitter, but there are 7 zillion articles around this. Like most of TechMeme is currently focused on this at the moment. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say later in the show. I want to instead talk about Ukraine and a couple of different things happening there. First of all, one of the things I talked a bit about in last show, but is certainly more clear now, is that we're seeing a scenario playing out that some of us have called the splinter net, where the internet, that is globally reachable as we know it, is starting to fragment into separate national networks. Now, this has happened for a long time with China, has its own great firewall of China and has its own separate world. But we're seeing it now with Russia. Russia, under President Putin, has appeared to want to, restrict and control everything that is used, that people see inside of Russia. Now, the Russian networks have been deeply integrated to the rest of the internet, and so it's been very hard to do this. But what's happened after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is many companies have been blocking Russia, cutting themselves off, pulling out of Russia, and the effect has been to disconnect things. I wrote a post called "What is the Splinter Net?" and why you should be paying attention, that talks about why this is an important thing to watch and what we should be concerned about. All of us who are communicators, of course, we want to get our content out to as many people around the world, and we really want it to be available everywhere without having to go to certain places and get through blocks or pay people to get access or anything else like that. So it's something to worry about, and TikTok showed exactly why. If you go to TikTok inside of Russia, your user experience will be completely different from the user experience outside of Russia. They have blocked all videos outside of Russia. You only see Russian videos, Russian government videos, and that's it. You have a filtered, just a completely filtered view of the world inside of that app. This is a danger because it creates filter bubbles, echo chambers, all of that, but it also winds up making it not possible for us to truly reach other people globally in different ways. The good news is the walls are not entirely solid. There are ways to get through. And there was an article in the New York Times around how U.S.-backed news outlets and activists were piercing those walls to get information into people inside about what's really happening. There was also some articles about, especially once Russia banned Instagram, VPN usage jumped up like 11,000% in terms of just they got to get their gram. They want to get on there. And so large usage in that, those kind of things are happening. A much more challenging thing, is there was a report in Wired about Russia's leaking data like a sieve. And it talked about how data from 1,600 soldiers and about 620 apparent spies associated with a Moscow branch of the FSB were all put online in a big data dump of personal information, what we call doxing, putting this information out there. The kicker here was that it wasn't attackers who did this. It was the Ukrainian intelligence service. It's an ethical space here. You're doxing people. You're putting information out there about them in their own space. Of course, in their mind, this is war. Nothing's off the table when you get in this space. But it is concerning to see this escalation of getting all this personal information out there, which goes back to us as communicators. Is your personal information secure? Because you're not up against just attackers, but intelligence services, everyone else. Well, moving from a splintered version of the internet to a wacky version of the internet, let's talk Web3 cryptocurrencies for a minute. The news out of Wikipedia was that there was a vote through a community effort to go and request the Wikimedia Foundation to stop accepting donations in cryptocurrency, which they've been doing since, I think, 2014 or something like that. Anyway, it passed. It's non-binding. It's a suggestion to the Wikimedia Foundation. But it certainly stirred up a lot of, anxiety, a lot of interest, a lot of concern, a lot of things around what was going on. And the major reason was because look at the environmental impact, the climate change concerns, everything else. Why should Wikipedia be giving this a stamp of legitimacy? We'll see. But one of the concerns, of course, was the amount of power, energy consumption from what's called the proof of work. Well, Ethereum has been talking about moving to something called proof of stake for many years now. The so-called merge has been about 6 months away for 6 years or something, maybe not that long. But it's supposed to happen this June. But now that's been pushed out a little bit later. We'll have to see. We'll see where that goes. But that certainly is one of the biggest criticisms of many of the blockchain and other different elements that are out there. We'll have to see. Speaking of just different elements in there, the NFT space, which I personally can't believe is even there, but the NFT, the receipt for Jack Dorsey's first tweet, sold last year for $2.9 million to somebody, who then turned around this year and tried to list it for $48 million. At the end of the bidding, the magic number was $280. Yes, indeed, from $2.9 million to $280. Let's hope some of that continues and we can, pop that bubble around NFTs a little bit to get to something really interesting. By the way, if you're not following web3isgoinggreat.com or on Twitter, fascinating place to see all of what's happening in this wacky space. I want to wrap up with just a quick smorgasbord of what's happening in some of the other apps. TikTok rolled out something called Effect House, which lets you go and create your own AR filters, which then can be shared and other people can use in TikTok videos. So for the creatives out there, might be an interesting way to do something with your brand or something. Who knows? They're trying a dislike button to see if they can go and help do it. It won't be shown, but it'll be something that'll give feedback internally. Instagram this month also rolled out a host of new DM direct message features. You can share music. You can do polls. You can do a number of other different features. So look at that. And finally, Spotify bought Locker Room to do social audio, live audio like Clubhouse, etc. They rebranded it Green Room. But now they're rebranding it Spotify Live and integrating it with the main app where people can listen to your live social audio streams. They can't actually interact from the main Spotify app. And right now that's only available to kind of Spotify's own little, cadre of original content producers, etc. But something to pay attention to. Let's see if this breathes some life into that live streaming social audio kind of space. With that, I'm going to wrap up and just say, on a different note, I'm working on a project at the Internet Society this year about low Earth orbit satellites for Internet access. Things like Starlink, SpaceX, or Amazon's Project Kuiper. If you or your company are involved in that space, I'd love to talk to you. Just learn a little bit more about what you're doing, that kind of stuff. You can contact me on email, or you can, find me at Dan York on Twitter, something like that. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you guys. Look forward to hearing more, and you can find more of my audio and writing at danyork.me. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.
Thanks, Dan. And yeah, that last item about the attempt to auction off Jack Dorsey's first tweet that had been bought for millions of dollars, and the high bid was in the hundreds of dollars. I agree with you. I hope there's more of that. I hope this ridiculous inflated value for digital stuff that genuinely isn't worth what people are paying for it. I agree. I hope that bubble bursts, but I don't see the bubble as NFTs in general, just this particular frenzy around this particular application of NFTs. I mean, I think NFTs are just one form of an asset token. There are also fungible tokens. And this is what's allowing for things like fractional ownership, right? The idea that rather than having to spend millions of dollars on a piece of art, I can invest $500 in a valuable piece of art, along with thousands of other people, and own a piece of it. And if it sells for more, then I get a return on my investment. So just as there's a use for fungible tokens, there are uses for non-fungible tokens. The metaverse that we were just talking about is definitely one of them. I mean, how are you going to buy parcels of land in the metaverse? How are you going to buy clothing and property in the metaverse? That's all going to be NFTs. It's just a token that designates you as the owner of this digital thing. And of course, NFTs can also represent ownership of non-digital things. They can represent ownership of things in the real world. So, I mean, a fungible token is also $8 bill, for example. It's just a token that designates a certain amount of value. It's not backed by gold or silver or anything like that. It's just everybody's agreed that we're going to use this as a form of exchange for goods and services. So I think there's tons of legitimate uses of NFTs. We haven't even thought about most of them yet. So I hope that this does end so that we can end this rolling of the eyes when we hear about these uses and start applying NFTs to things that are useful and valuable and legitimate.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold your breath about the rolling of the eyes, Shel. That's going to be going on for a long time, I think. But it's interesting that Dan thinks this applies to all NFTs, that they shouldn't, that we're going to blow out that market, I suppose. It's interesting that the perceived value of these things. So to my mind, I think it was $280 was the bid. Therefore, that's what it's worth at that time. If someone is willing to pay that, in the same vein, I would argue that if someone's willing to pay 20 million for it, that's what it's worth to that person. That's fine. Right. You're going to see a lot more of that. I would say, though, that the vast majority of trades that are happening on the various NFT marketplaces, particularly with works of art, digital art, are in the tens of dollars. That's the kind of what's kind of driving the engine forward. It's not spectacular. It's not making the headlines and the rolling of the eyes because that's what gets the attention. Those are still going to happen. There have been a couple of instances recently of multi-million-dollar sales of NFTs. But largely, this to me seems to me to be characteristic of one of the stages of evolution of a market like this, where the combination of rolling of the eyes and people applying the kind of this has got to stop across the board is what happens until something else happens that makes you pause and say, well, hang on a sec, maybe it is, the tipping point of some kind, who knows? But it is interesting seeing this happening. I think the biggest issue with NFTs is more in the areas of the stuff that is making some mainstream media headlines in terms of frauds and scams and outright forgery of content. Some of the scams have been spectacular. There was one recently, $600 million. And these are, as I understand it from what I've read, not technology issues, they're human issues. Someone was able to hack into a system that was not well protected and able to scoot off with all the digital currency. So those are the real issues that we should be concerned about. I think anything that stimulates the imagination and creativity, there's a learning curve to all of this, and in which case, these silly prices that we keep hearing about, and again, silly is a very subjective word here to some, are going to continue, I would say. The marketplace, the overall market is still embryonic in so many ways. People are experimenting all the time. The numbers, though, show that this is not a fly-by-night issue at all. The various projections, equally silly numbers in my mind. I see one, I think it was Morgan Stanley, $20 trillion or $2 trillion. I can't remember which way around it was now.
Either way.
Yeah, it's what the hell does that mean, for God's sake? Either way, it's with us. There are new entrants all the time. There are people learning things, and there are others making mistakes. Some people are making quite a bit of money. Many are losing quite a bit of money. It's a free market economy. It's a wild west, ripe for regulation, some would argue. I don't think it's got to a stage where you'll know what to regulate yet. So it's still very embryonic. But the answer to me, apart from the it depends, of course, Shel, is just watch the space.
Yeah, you talk about early days, and I was reading about some of the early DAOs where the smart contracts were written by engineers who were just looking for having a way to raise some funds through token sales, and they really didn't understand business enough to write the governance part of the smart contract, which led to either hacking or manipulation. So yeah, there's a lot to be figured out with all of Web3, which is why we say it's early days.
Yeah, I mean, on that thing about big numbers, thinking about that, you've got people like auction houses, Sotheby's notably. Arguably, they are driving a lot of that because they're the ones who are auctioning, Beeple's $60 million. There's been a handful of others in the lower millions, single digit millions, also through auction houses. So are they the ones who are at fault here, if fault is the right word to apply? I don't think so. Market demand. This is an element of capitalism, if you like, for better or worse, and that is the nature of it. It is certainly buyer beware without any doubt whatsoever. If you don't know what you're doing, I saw someone tweeting the other day, a really good tweet. If you're not following interest rate adjustments and you're speculating with NFTs, you really need to know what you're doing. I think that's absolutely right. So this is something for the informed to play in, or those who have lots of money, they don't mind losing it. It is a Wild West.
Place for Elon Musk.
Who we're going to come on to in a minute, right?
We will definitely do that in a bit. But first, unless you've been in a self-imposed media blackout for the last few months, you know about the political feud taking place between the Walt Disney Company and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. This all happened because DeSantis supported state legislation nicknamed the Don't Say Gay bill, which Disney opposed and did so openly. Now, to be fair, Disney's CEO, Bob Chapek, was kind of slow to take a stand, but pressure from employees and customers led him to finally be forthright in his condemnation of the law, which DeSantis signed and is now in place. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of all of this, but I will note that a Disney shareholder named Ray Keating also took a stand. He's been speaking out against the company's involvement in Florida politics, saying it doesn't turn out well when companies get into politics. In an interview with Fox News Digital, Keating said, and I'm quoting here, "Here's a suggestion for Disney CEO Bob Chapek. Get back to business. That is excellence in storytelling. And stop wasting shareholders' money on political crusades that have nothing to do with Disney's business. We all have the right to have our voices heard on issues, but not on the shareholders' dime." Now, the response from Disney insiders to Keating's position has been interesting, including Abigail Disney, Walt's granddaughter, who wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post calling for Disney to be more political. And there's some research to suggest customers are mostly behind the company's position. 47% of Disney fans, and that's a plurality in the survey, want companies with business in Florida to donate to LGBTQ plus groups in response to the legislation. They were less interested in companies taking drastic measures, though, like issuing statements. And I found all of this particularly interesting in light of an article I read on Campaign US. Now, by way of context, we've been talking for years on FIR about the absolute mountain of data reinforcing the notion that companies do need to step out of the shadows and take a stand on social and environmental issues that matter to people. In fact, we've talked about this so much, I've started rejecting stories that support that just because I don't want to beat a dead horse. But the research does show that people want to work from and buy from companies that take steps to address these issues. And of course, the Edelman Trust Barometer repeatedly finds people expect companies to address social and environmental issues because they've lost faith in the ability of government and NGOs to do it. Now, 3 years ago, the Business Roundtable revised its statement on corporate purpose, shifting its focus from just shareholders and instead saying companies exist to serve the interests of all of its stakeholders. And that would include employees, customers, the general public, and the communities in which they operate. And there was a lot of enthusiasm around that pivot. It was endorsed by 181 CEOs of global corporations. Well, the Campaign US article cast doubt on whether companies are sticking with the idea. The article says that based on recent actions, you'd be forgiven for wondering if all or most corporations cared about was still its owners and share price. The piece points out that President Biden recently blasted corporations for using profits to buy back millions of dollars in stock rather than, say, improve worker pay or invest in job creation or invest in sustainability projects. CEO compensation has returned to all-time highs. We've mentioned here that a lot of companies have opted to continue doing business in Russia. There's a couple of professors who've created a hall of shame of multinationals still operating in Russia, with companies like AstraZeneca, Hyatt, Mondelez Nabisco, and Subway earning a D grade from the pair. The article also looks at Weasley statements around climate changes coming from some companies that say things like, we've committed to being a net zero operation by such and such a year, when what needs to be communicated is the path to get there and what the company has done so far. It's Weasley statements like that that led the Securities and Exchange Commission to create the rule we talked about a couple episodes ago, with ESG statements now required to adhere to the same rigor as financial disclosures. So I'm wondering, is the purposeful organization going to thrive? Will there be some that embrace purpose while most revert to their old profit above all else approaches to business? Some communicators have to feel like they're being whipsawed here. We're a purposeful company. Communicate that, but not really. Was it all a pipe dream? It's a little disconcerting to see that this hasn't been embraced the way it seemed with the Business Roundtable statement that it would be.
Yeah, it is. That's a really interesting assessment, that campaign piece. I did like that focus they have on that. It's a very difficult one, isn't it, Shel? Because you're right. Something I've noticed, not in the active sense you have, that a lot of companies over here too have launched share buyback schemes. I get it, return value to the shareholders and all that, but hang on a minute. There's these other things you should also be doing, or should be doing instead, maybe. But I don't see groundswells of opinion about that. Articles like this, for instance, I've not seen anything in the business press that I pay attention to in any meaningful way. What will change it? I mean, I think. Before you answer that, to your point, I think this seems to be a trend going this way. A good example, and maybe it's related because we're going to talk about this shortly, Elon Musk. I saw someone talking just the other day about the richest man in the world is keen on buying Twitter, where his money could actually be used to alleviate world hunger. I mean, that's a kind of analogy that I see applied to a lot of companies. Instead of putting share buyback programs, you could be doing X. So what is it that's caused this is the question I would have. What is it that's driving this apparently sudden activity by large corporations that are publicly listed to use the kind of huge cash they've achieved to buy back shares instead of some sustainable activity even? What is it? That's the question I have.
Well, you also have Jeff Bezos sending celebrities into space instead of improving conditions in Amazon warehouses, which led to the unionization of the Staten Island warehouse, the first unionized Amazon warehouse. And that's a huge deal. And I really believe in capitalism. I believe in making a profit, but I don't believe that you should be making a profit until you have fulfilled your other obligations. Now, you're going to pay the bills to your suppliers. Yeah. You're going to pay the bills to the utilities to keep the lights on, and you're going to pay the rent on the places where you're maintaining office space and things like that. I think that we need to have a broader view of what an organization's obligations are. And what's left after you've done that, that's the profit. I mean, what is the cost of doing business? If you're paring the cost of business down to the bone and creating pain for the planet and for people in the process, that's not right. And I think, having a purpose means that you're going to behave responsibly. It's called corporate social responsibility for a reason, right? And I think behaving responsibly is important. We're going to talk a little bit about this a little later in the episode. But I have no problem with profit. I have no problem with people getting rich, but not at the expense of communities and employees and customers.
Yeah. I mean, like you, I believe in capitalism myself too, with all the yes, but attributes. I recall here in this country, this is going back to Margaret Thatcher's days, who is a name that elicits severe reactions, plus all good or bad from people. But one of the scandals that occurred in her era was dubbed the unacceptable face of capitalism. I can't remember which scandal it was offhand, but that's a phrase that's always often stuck in my mind and pops out whenever I see what I consider to be really not good behavior by an erstwhile company that is got a good reputation and behavioral one as well, does something that you think, wait a minute, that's not right what you're doing. Are we not seeing, though, then now it seems to me, a surfeit of that behavior? There seems to be a huge amount of questionably moral and ethical behavior being conducted by leaders of organizations that you think, hang on a second, why are you doing this? Selfishness. P&O was a good example. We mentioned that at the beginning of the show, the scandal over the company firing 800 employees and replacing them with lower cost contract workers. These are the people who manage these car ferries that ply the English Channel and across to Ireland and also other parts of Europe as well. They broke the law, they admit it, and they said this to them getting a fine for doing it was the best option because the union would never go for it. I mean, that's the background. You've got to question the morality of the leaders of that company. And that, in my mind, is what is the main issue with these behaviors that we're seeing. I don't believe it's anything other than that, Shel. There's something driving leaders of companies who get X millions of pounds pay, and the employees are on minimum wage in many cases, getting more, and the employees not. And that's, I hate to say it, but it seems to me that's always been the case. It just seems to be worse at the moment. What's going to change that? It's a bit like the arguments about social media, self-regulation doesn't work. Government regulation is the answer. I'm not sure I agree with that at all, because governments don't have a good track record either in regulating in a way that suits everyone. It's very narrow. So there's no win here, it seems to me. I think this behavior, I gotta say, it has to change. I have no idea how it would change without the willingness of an organization to make a decision that says, no, we're not going to put this £100 million into buying back shares. We're actually going to give that or spend it on X that everyone benefits in, either the workforce or customers or some such, or everyone in some way that is aligned with the vision and mission that these companies often parrot when they talk about share buybacks, about shareholder value and stuff like that. I mean, yes, as you said, agree. Making a profit is a legitimate activity and one of the purposes of being in business, particularly as a listed company, for your shareholders, but not only that group. So there's something really out of balance with all of this that seems to have got worse in the last couple of years, and it's getting worse, still worse.
Yeah, I think what's going to change it, if it changes, is going to be a gradual shift in the culture. Shareholder activism saying, no, this is not acceptable. It's investors taking their money to companies that behave responsibly and not to the organizations that behave this way. It's employees going to work for organizations that behave responsibly and not the ones that behave this way. It's customers buying from those companies. I think when you see that the way to be successful and make the greatest profit is to behave responsibly and address these social issues before you take your cut, that's what's going to change things. I don't see. I think pain is the only thing that's going to make it.
Agree. And all those things, you're right. I just don't see them happening voluntarily. They're not across the board, not in a sufficient scale, ranging from the customer who says, no, I'm not going to buy that £20 product from this company because of, and all the reasons why they're not. Instead, I'm going to buy that same type of product from that company for £40 because they don't behave that way. I don't see that happening in any big way, except for people who are the kind of people who do that, and they're sadly in the minority. Particularly now, you could argue that now this country and most of Europe, US is no different too, is currently at the early stages of a severe cost of living crisis. I mean, prices are rocketing, energy costs are going up. I'm seeing when I go to the supermarket, and I tend to, prices go up, 10 pence, 12 pence, 5 pence here and there. These little bits that are incrementing everything. Then again, I'm seeing more deals. So, it swings around. The point is, though, that you've got so many choices to make nowadays that your own. Let me add one quick analogy to this. One thing I do as a matter of course now, the main supermarket, when I go do grocery shopping, and I tend to, my wife doesn't do that. This is from the pandemic days, by the way, where only one of us would physically go to a place that made our risk worse of catching COVID. So I was the one who was doing that. One thing I do, and the supermarket I do on most of our shopping is Tesco, the biggest one in the UK. They have a system on their scanning thing when you go to the till, some auto pay and all that asks you, do you want to donate the balance of the difference between a full roundup to £1 to £2 to £3 or whatever the cost might be, those pennies to charity? I always do that. Now, what difference does that make? Well, these are, to me, the things that we're addressing here. It's little things by lots of people. Plus, it makes me feel good that I'm doing that. I donate to quite a few charities, not as many as I would love to. I can't afford to do all of that. This, though, I can because it's a tiny amount, but it all adds up. So if a million other shoppers did the same, that'd be great. But, well done, Tesco, doing that. I don't see other supermarkets doing that. So that needs to be more of that. And more people will do that. These are the little things. So you need to encourage little behaviors that are cumulative at scale. And these are at scale. So that, to me, is part of solving this issue.
Yeah, Safeway does that. I shop at Safeway, and I do the same. Always round up. Also, Panda Express. It's one charity. I can't remember which one, but they always ask when you're paying, "Would you like to round up?" It's not on the device. It's
right.
It's the customer service rep asking. But inflation may actually have an impact on all of this because as costs rise and CEO pay rises, but employee pay remains stagnant, it could lead to some activism in order to get employees to be to get companies to be more responsible.
I think it will lead to activism, but not in a nice way. I can see this causing actually social unrest in quite a big scale. Here you've got talk about that kind of thing, and here you've got the political interference of it all, with people expecting the government to step in and cough up money so people don't have to pay so much on energy bills. That is not the way to resolve this, in my opinion. Yet it's action. There's no action. And instead what you're seeing is more and more leaders of organizations making tons of money and people who are lower down the food chain, as it were, using food banks. I mean, this is all you say to yourself is, this is not right. None of this seems right to me. So what do we do about it? That's always that thing. We need to do something about this. Well, what exactly? I don't believe relying on governments to step in is the total answer, although they have a big role, obviously. It's got to show leadership from organizations to recognize that the full circle of benefit has to embrace every single one who's touched in that organization. And that's something, some companies do this, by the way. There are some I can think of, and indeed one I work with, that is doing that kind of thing. And it's exemplary what they're doing. But no, not everyone is doing that. Indeed, some others, a bit like the league tables of companies who are still in Russia and who have left. There's a hardcore on that scale of that Yale University is managing. I think it's the F grades, who are, no matter what, they're staying there. And there are some, to be fair, who can't leave for legal reasons because of franchises and so forth. But those who could leave should, and take the pain hit, benefit them in the long term. So these are all aspects of behavior that are out of kilter, it seems to me, to be what we should be expecting from organizations, whether they're private or public, doesn't matter. And that's a dilemma. And unfortunately, I just do not see change coming.
At least not soon.
Unless it's a revolution of some type, so.
Well, social unrest can lead to change.
Yeah, it can, but it's very painful.
Yeah, it certainly is. I like what the company I work for does in a number of these areas, but we're going to get to one of those in a bit. But first, we're going to talk about Elon Musk.
That was a nice segue, Shel, from that topic. It was good. So we're going to talk.
Yeah, I worked on that while you were chatting.
I thought you did, yeah. Okay, so Twitter is in the news, as is Elon Musk, who has made a bid. And everyone, I'm sure, listening to this knows that, so I'm not going to go through the whole story. Just Google it, Twitter Elon Musk, and you'll get all the details there. But he made a bid to buy the whole company, following his announcement of his share purchasing, giving him just under 10% of all the shareholders, of all the shares, rather. So that changed to a full bid. Lots of talk about this, as you can well imagine, in the tech press. It didn't make news headlines the way I thought it might over here anyway. It was a main item on the news, and then it was gone. It wasn't on the news headlines anymore. But there's elements to this that I found interesting that I thought it was worth discussing on our show today, because this angle is more about, it's not about the bid itself and so forth. It's more about what it means in terms of Twitter's role as a communication channel. What would Musk's ownership of Twitter mean in that? The article that piqued my interest was written by Anjana Susala in the Conversation US edition. And she had a great headline: Elon Musk's bid spotlights Twitter's unique role in public discourse. It's true. She talks about some of the changes that will happen. That have been quite a bit of commentary about those. She also says that given partisanship and political polarization in online spaces, allowing users, whether they're automated bots or actual people, the option to edit their tweets, and this is another main point of all of this that caught my eye, could become another weapon in the disinformation arsenal used by bots and propagandists. Editing tweets could allow users to selectively distort what they said or deny making inflammatory remarks, which could complicate efforts to trace misinformation. So that's a speculative comment. We talked about this, the edit button that people were talking about recently. It's complex, requiring some agreement on exactly what it would actually do or enable users to do. But, as we discussed in episode 245, that's actually only a few days ago, it's a change that Twitter isn't objecting to. Indeed, it posted that it's working on such a function. That's not, they say, not driven because Elon Musk is saying it ought to be an edit button. So that's one of the changes that arguably is, if it's not, it's happened because of, it's certainly been accelerated, I would say, because of Musk's activity. So it'd be interesting to see what happens if his bid succeeds. And that's an important thing to mention because there's no indication yet that it will. There's stories about a poison pill that Twitter's putting in place. Some other persons emerged offering $60 a share, so I read the other day. Someone, a Chinese investor. I haven't seen that mentioned many places, though, I have to say. So what's it all going to be? I think the biggest area of interest and some alarm from many observers is that of freedom of speech. And that's part of the rest of this report I want to share about what will Musk's control of Twitter mean for that. But before I get into that, let me ask you, Shel, what's your take on this?
Well, I hope he doesn't get his hands on it. Interestingly, last night on Saturday Night Live on Weekend Update, the news segment that they do, they reported on this and said, and people are worried that it's going to make Twitter worse than it is. Because, Twitter can already be something of a cesspool, right? But yeah, I am disturbed by the idea of unfettered free speech, because of disinformation. I think it is incumbent upon the organizations that own these platforms to ensure that disinformation and misinformation is controlled. I don't think that free speech should include the ability to convince people of things that aren't true in support of some political, social, or economic agenda. So I like the idea. I want more controls to ensure that this stuff doesn't spread. If you want unfettered free speech, go to Telegram. That's what it's all about. But just the fact that Musk, whose own personal views seem to bounce around back and forth, and who has, misused Twitter more than once in his career, the idea that he would be the one making policy decisions there worries the hell out of me. I think he should continue to make electric cars. And, I actually admire his space venture as opposed to Bezos's, because he's actually advancing the science to an extent. But I think he should leave Twitter alone. He also doesn't know anything about media.
Well, that's a thrust of a lot of the narratives that I've read. We reported, it must be 2 years ago, maybe on the show, about the demise of Tesla's PR department, where they'd all left. And it was actually Musk who was fielding press commentary and so forth in tweets that kind of got people thinking, what? Publicly listed company, all that. So there's an
and a lot of employees are saying they would leave if he took over.
So there's an indicator. There was a good report in The Guardian just a couple of days ago, April the 14th, saying that Musk's main concern appears to be with Twitter's content moderation policies. And that sits in that area of free speech. What are we moderating? I've seen quite a lot of commentary in America, particularly from people citing the First Amendment, saying you can't do this. It's all it should be open up. So that debate's part of it as well. But in March, just last month, Musk tweeted a poll asking users whether the site adhered to the principle of free speech. The Guardian doesn't say what the outcome of that poll was. I did read it, but I can't remember, to be honest. But he said, given that Twitter serves as the de facto public town square, failing to adhere to free speech principles fundamentally undermines democracy. What should be done? He has declared himself a free speech absolutist. And in that context, a Twitter-banned former US President Donald Trump must be hoping Musk's bid succeeds. I thought that was an amusing comment. Elsewhere, some narratives are pretty scathing of Musk and his bid. For example, writing in Tech Dirt on April the 15th, Mike Masnick analyzes an interview Musk did on April the 14th with Chris Anderson on a live TED Talk. This is interesting. I watched quite a bit of that interview. But in his article, Masnick toos and froes in unpacking Musk's views on free speech, content moderation, and many contradictions of thought, saying that the interview demonstrates how little he understands content moderation. The public town square Musk speaks of is the internet itself, not Twitter, Masnick says. Twitter's just one private shop in that town square with its own rules. He adds, opening up a platform broadly does not inspire trust. Being broadly inclusive and trustworthy also requires recognizing that bad actors need to be dealt with in some form or another. This is what people have spent over a decade working on, and Musk acts like it's a brand new issue. The overall TED interview, which also covers Tesla and the future of the world, runs nearly an hour. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. I think part of Masnick's conclusion is worth stating here, as it summarizes what I see some others questioning. He says the simple fact is that dealing with human nature and human communication is much, much, much more complex than teaching a car how to drive by itself. And there is no perfect solution. There is no congrats we got there moment in content moderation. Because humans are complex and ever changing, and content moderation on a platform like Twitter is about recognizing that complexity and figuring out ways to deal with it. But Musk seems to be treating it as if it's some sort of challenge of the same sort of challenge as self-driving, where if you just throw enough ideas at it, you'll magically fix it. Now, you mentioned, Shel, that there's talk about some employers, or quite a few actually, saying they'd quit if Musk took over. I guess the proof in the pudding will be if that day happens. There's no news yet whether his bid will succeed. We know that as we're recording this show, this episode on April the 17th, that's Sunday, things might change by the time listeners hear the show when it's published on Monday, the 18th. So it's fast-moving breaking news. Isn't that fun to be part of that, eh? But it is something that is evolving. And anyone with an opinion, much of it informed, is voicing their opinions online, and typically on Twitter. And that's another thing about Twitter, by the way, that whether we like it or not, and the eye rollers don't agree with this at all, of course, but just look at what you see on Twitter these days. It is a formal communication channel for many organizations, a lot of politicians, and many other people's prominent public figures, even,
journalists,
small businesses who use it as a means of telling their followers and the wider world what's going on. People are referencing tweets. I see now it's just de jour for news organizations, news item where the news anchor's reading out something and saying, and so tweeted the announcement, blah, it's like, that's normal.
Sure. People who don't even have Twitter accounts learn about stuff because it was initially communicated on Twitter.
So this is what we're talking about here. And the picture, I think, is hugely complex. This is one of the reasons why I think this is of critical interest to communicators. It is a very complex picture. The notion of a private individual, happens to be the world's wealthiest individual, who's got conflicts of interest, given that he's the CEO of two public companies, Tesla and SpaceX. Actually, I'm not sure SpaceX is public, but anyway, two companies that are influential businesses in key industry sectors, automotive and aerospace. Well, actually, space, right? Then becoming the sole owner of a communication network that has such importance and significance as Twitter does. No matter whether people think it should or it shouldn't, it does. Okay, it's got in the couple of 100 million active daily users compared to Facebook, which is like 2.5 billion or whatever. It's not the same as Facebook. So that's, to me, the landscape. So someone like Musk assuming control of this organization is alarming to me, based on, not just based on this, but this cements some of my thinking when I read stuff like this, that it suggests that his true understanding of not only how Twitter works and how content moderation works, but on what it ought to be as we're evolving the behaviors of people, including all the bad guys who use stuff. And this reflects human behavior. And indeed, Mike Masnick makes the point very clearly. He doesn't seem to get human behavior at all.
No, that's pretty clear from his own. In a number of ways. Another aspect of this that I haven't heard anybody talk about is how effective he can be as CEO of 3 companies. I mean, Jack Dorsey did this with 2 companies and was criticized about having divided attention and not being able to focus when he needed to focus on what was going on with one of the organizations. And here you're going to have Musk with 3. So that's an issue. And I just want to respond. You mentioned that a lot of people are talking about the First Amendment, which just makes me want to pound my head on the table, because that's not what the First Amendment says. The First Amendment to the Constitution simply says that the U.S. government cannot arrest you or stop you from speaking your mind. And even that has limitations. I mean, you can sue somebody for slander or libel. What happened to their free speech? Well, there's limitations on every one of the amendments. And the idea that the First Amendment means anybody can say anything on any platform, you can't come into my house and start saying things that offend me. I'll make you leave. Right? That's not a violation of your First Amendment rights. So please, people, especially Americans, try to understand what the First Amendment is and isn't. Makes me nuts.
And on that note, I think we undoubtedly will come back to this story, probably in one of our short form episodes in between this and the next monthly episode. I feel sure that there will be developments in this pretty soon.
Probably before the end of the day.
Possibly so. But it will be interesting to see the what ifs. If he does succeed in his bid for Twitter, who else is coming out there? Is there a white knight in the wings? I mean, all of these things are fascinating, and I'm sure there's going to be a series on Netflix or Disney Plus. No, it won't be on Disney. Apple TV maybe soon.
Yeah, and you never know. The Federal Trade Commission or the Securities and Exchange Commission could have issues with his taking over too. Although I haven't seen anything reported about that.
So the main thing is, folks, stay tuned to what's going on.
Well, let's close out this episode with an interesting bit of research about consumer perceptions of corporate philanthropy, talking about organizations doing the right thing. You might be inclined to think people would react most favorably to companies that donate the most money. I mean, the saying is, put your money where your mouth is, right? But research suggests that people focus less on how much you donate and more on whether the donations seem like a sizable portion of your company's earnings. In fact, according to an article from the Working Knowledge site from the Harvard Business School, consumers favor brands that seem to be giving a larger cut of their profits, even if the total dollar amount is lower compared to brands that give a smaller proportion of profits, but larger total dollar amounts to charity. Now, the article gives one example. In 2015, Walmart donated $301 million. That represented 2% of their profits. Target, on the other hand, donated about a third of that, $111.5 million, but it represented 5% of their total profits. Consumers chose Target as the more generous company of the two. Now, this research comes at an important time. Donations dried up during the pandemic, and just as employees are thinking about what they want to do with the rest of their lives as a result of the time they've had to reflect, they're calling this the Great Resignation, right? Companies are rethinking their approaches to corporate donations. The Harvard research showed how future giving could better appeal to consumers while still benefiting charities. Now, there were actually 5 separate studies in this sort of a meta-study program. They were conducted in 2020 and 2021 mostly. There were about 900 people participating. In one of these, participants were told that they should that they'd be thanked for their time with a $1 coupon for an ice cream from either Baskin-Robbins or Cold Stone Creamery. They were also told that one of the stores had donated $12,000 to charity, representing 15% of quarterly profits, while the other had donated $23,000 or 7% of quarterly profits. About 70% chose Cold Stone Creamery when they were told it donated relatively more, but when it was described as having donated a higher absolute amount of money, only 41% chose its coupon. When Baskin-Robbins was said to be donating a higher percentage of profits, 59% chose its coupon, but only 30% chose it when they thought it had donated a higher dollar amount, but a lower percentage of total profits. One of the researchers in this effort said, it appears that generosity is being judged from the perspective of sacrifice and what they've given up relative to what they have. And here we get back to what we were talking about before with corporate purpose and the like is, you're going to be left with less profit. You're going to still be left with profit, but you're going to be left with less because you decided that it was important to donate more. Companies can learn from these findings, according to the researchers. If you want to impress consumers, consider ways to emphasize your generosity, like maybe running more shorter-term campaigns in which you donate a higher proportion of short-term profits. You can also reassess the whole approach you take to your programs. Where I work, we have what's called a 1-1-1 program. We donate 1% of our profits, 1% of employee time. We give every employee 2.5 days to go out into the community and donate their time at food banks or other types of community activities. That comes to 1% of employee time. And that's paying people when they're not working, right? They're out donating. And then we donate 1% of our revenue in the form of in-kind donations, which could be construction materials. It could be labor. For example, we recently rebuilt the rhinoceros enclosure at the San Francisco Zoo as a pro bono activity. That was both materials and labor. One of the researchers said consumers are a lot more informed about what firms are doing. So it's important to be authentic in your giving because consumers seek out the information and will start to make comparisons on their own. So some considerations for communicators looking to influence the public perception of the organization's reputation in making recommendations about the approach their employers and clients take to philanthropy.
Yeah, I found it really interesting, the commentary in the reporting that it's more acceptable and people get more impressed by an organization's behavior where it is what they donate to rather than how much they donate to it. And that wouldn't occur to me before. And is that a new thing, do you think, Shel? I mean, it's getting attention now.
I think, yeah, it's a good question. I don't know if people would have reacted the same way if the study had been done 20 years ago. Maybe, but nobody was looking at it.
No, you're right. I don't think people had this kind of data analysis at that time. I have a feeling it would be just like, we donated 20,000 to XYZ charity. Oh, great.
Well, of course, there was a time when how much you donated and what you donated to was what the CEO's spouse was into. Oh, loves the symphony, so we're donating to the symphony. Yeah. And I think we've gotten a lot more sophisticated in the approaches that we take to philanthropy now.
That's precisely it. Exactly. We have. Our understanding is deeper. We're more critical. We're more knowledgeable ourselves in terms of what's going on, generally speaking, and seeing behaviors like this. I think.
Yeah, donating to the spouse's favorite activity is not consistent with the idea of the S in ESG.
Absolutely. Well, it's a good trend. I think this is really good. So, question what they're doing as opposed to how much.
Yeah, what they're doing and how much sacrifice, right? Am I giving more of the profit, leaving less to distribute among shareholders and executive bonuses, not leaving nothing? I mean, we could still be talking about substantial amounts of money. We could still be talking about making people filthy rich with what's left of the profit, but deciding that some of that profit should be going back into the community. And the organizations that decide more of it should go into the community are the ones that are reaping the reputational benefit.
And we have the evidence right here.
So what do you think? Did the episode live up to...
This was a blockbuster.
What we thought at the beginning?
I can say that. In my view, this was a blockbuster. I hope listeners agree.
Yeah, I hope so too, and I hope you'll comment. Before I tell you how to do that, though, I want to let you know, first of all, that we will continue recording our FIR shorts, as I think somebody is calling them, during the week. The first one of those should be out on Tuesday. Have no idea what it'll be about yet. We'll have to share some thoughts. But the next episode of this monthly Hobson and Holtz Report is currently scheduled to be released on Monday, May 23rd. So keep a listen out for that. In terms of how to comment, send email to fircomments@gmail.com. Attach up to a 3-minute audio file. If you would like your voice heard on the show, we'll respond to that. You can record that comment directly from the FIR website. Just click the Send Voicemail tab on the right-hand side of the page and record. You can leave a comment directly on the show notes for this episode at firpodcastnetwork.com and share your thoughts on the FIR community on Facebook. We have a post up there for every episode, and if you just comment on the post, we'll include that in our review of comments. As you can tell from this episode, nobody took advantage of any of those over the last month, and we really would like to bring listeners back into the conversation. So we appreciate your comments. We also appreciate your ratings and reviews, which you can leave on iTunes and anywhere else that you get your podcasts. And with that, we'll put a 30 on this episode of For Immediate Release.